A lot of stuff going on behind the scenes here at American Medicine Today. I am Kimberly Bonatti, joined by my great group of friends, Ethan Euchre.
Happy to be here.
Yes, Jeff Wagstaff.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, and world-renowned orthopedic surgeon, Dr. Alfred Bonatti.
Hi.
So, President Trump recently signed legislation into law which would grant terminally ill patients access to experimental drugs before they're approved by the FDA. And here to discuss what is being called the Right to Try law is Raymond March, research fellow at the Independent Institute. Thank you for being here, Raymond.
Thank you for having me.
Now, for those that don't know, and I actually didn't know what this law was until I read the story recently, explain what Right to Try is.
Sure. Right to Try is now national legislation as signed in by President Trump, which is going to allow patients with terminal illnesses who either don't have a current remedy or treatment available or who have exhausted all previous treatment options now are going to have access to medication which is in the pipeline of the FDA approval process. So it's not fully approved by the FDA, but it's gone through phase one and shown at least some initial promise.
Now, many criticize this bill. Why would that be? Because if you're terminally ill, I mean, your option is imminent death or something that may help you live. Why would anyone ever be against that law?
There's several reasons, and a few of them come to mind. Primarily, one is I think a lot of individuals are concerned that pharmaceutical companies or drug providers will take advantage of these laws and, for lack of a better word, experiment on terminally ill patients. Another one might be the fact that because it's not fully FDA approved, we might be exposing people who are terminally ill to excessive levels of risk. I personally don't find either of those arguments convincing, but those are the ones that seem to pop up the most often.
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking at death square in the face, I promise you I will try whatever you put in front of me.
Some of the criticism, people were calling it a cruel joke. Some also said that it prevents false hope, which could, again, in quotes, undermine public health. None of that makes any sense to me. No. And to me, if anything, it's not a false hope. If I were dying and somebody said, hey, there's a drug.
It's a glimmer of hope.
Might work for you. To me, that's hope, regardless of if it works or not. Especially if you go into it knowing, okay, it might not work, but that's the same way with any medicine.
But you're no worse off. You're no worse off. If it doesn't work, you die. If you never tried it, you die.
But we'll curtail also the fact that a lot of these people will be looking, as you said, hope, and we'll be moving to other countries to where the experimental drugs are really experimental and then get submitted to those ones that they also fail, but they remove all the fortune that these people need to pay for this exposure in other countries. And the abuse that happened is amazing to see. If you go to El Paso and then you go to the Mexican city right there, they are clinics just to serve this type of population, and they skill practically the people, giving drugs and giving medications that they are practically non-approved at all, and they're experimental in their surroundings. At least this is a drug that is being worked by the federal government here.
And actual researchers.
And it's with the real research and thing. I really think is unbelievable. Good idea.
It seems like the FDA would have a middle ground for these drugs that haven't been approved but have shown some promise to help patients, that they would allow a terminal patient to try it rather than try nothing.
There's a terminally ill patient. We have a drug that's not been fully approved, is somewhere in the approval process. We're going to grant this patient special exemption so they can try this experimental medication. There's roughly 25,000 patients each year that will die in the United States from various illnesses waiting for the FDA to approve a certain kind of drug.
So I would think the FDA could gather incredible information during testing by actually using these drugs as they're testing them on human patients. I would think they could gather so much more information much more rapidly than traditional testing.
And it could provide for better information, too. A lot of times when they have clinical processes or clinical trials going on, sometimes patients who are especially ill are actually voided out and not put into these processes because they're going to skew the data and make the drug look less or more effective.
Now, Ray, and this is actually something we've talked about on the show before, but I guess my memory is failing me. Why does it take so damn long for the FDA to approve things, especially, I mean, I get they got to cover their butts with lawsuits and things like that, but I mean, why does it take years, many and most times, for them to finally approve drugs that could be saving lives right away, really?
The FDA has every incentive in the world to make sure a drug is as safe as it could possibly be before it goes out to a consumer. Let's suppose the FDA is wrong and the consumer actually doesn't get better, or they might actually get worse. That immediately comes back into the FDA's face and looks like the FDA is not doing a good job. Drugs that never get approved, which could potentially help patients, never show up in the headlines because we never see the effect. So what you have in effect are perverse incentives where the FDA is going to be very hesitant to ever approve a drug that has even slight risks.
Now, Ray, what is the state of this bill? Because as we mentioned at the top of the interview, it already exists in some level on the state level, but this bill that Trump just put forward, and I think it still has to be voted on, right, would make it federal.
He already signed it.
Well, I know that, but so it's already law.
It's already laws.
Oh, I got you.
It's currently national law. Before President Trump had signed it in late May, it was approved at the state level at 38 states, which is pretty remarkable for states to be counteracting and going against the FDA's sort of regulatory authority.
Right.
But no, on May 30th, it did become national law.
Gotcha.
That's
I just know some bills they have to have a vote on, so that's where I was confused. So people can already start, and what do? They apply to get these drugs, or the doctors can recommend them?
The doctors can recommend it, yeah.
Okay. The way the law is currently written is that if someone is in a condition where right to try might be a viable option or they're willing to try it, they would speak to their physician. Physician would contact the pharmaceutical drug representative or the producer, and as long as all three parties agree, they can set up a trial. Wow. So it's bypassing the FDA completely, as long as it's been through the phase 1 process.
Well, let's hope doctors help their patients and don't become a stumbling block to receive this sort of help. Thank you so much for being on the program. Raymond March, research fellow at the Independent Institute, talking about legislation just signed into law by President Trump that grants terminally ill patients access to experimental drugs before they're fully approved by the FDA. Thank you for being on the show.
Thanks, Ray.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I think that's a very important law. I mean, when I first read about it, and obviously Doc seems pretty up to speed on the whole thing.
Yes.
And the beauty is that legally you're protected because the law protects the physician. It's not that if you write the prescription and then you talk to the pharmacy and both get together the drug,
the patient
then if the patient has a problem or something, then the family cannot come over and sue.
Right. Because they have informed consent when they're doing.
No, this terminally ill.
Correct.
Terminally ill. It's an experimental drug, and everybody needs to be agreeing that they are going to receive an experimental drug.
Okay.
And I think that's crucial for all Americans that are suffering.
Yeah, I think the FDA needs to be bypassed.
Thank you for listening and watching American Medicine Today.